This evening's Devar Torah is going to be something of a Bible quiz, but in order not to put the burden on those of you who are in the sanctuary, I think that I will be able to read the answers of those who are on YouTube or on Zoom. So if you have your fingers ready or your voices in the sanctuary, fingers on YouTube or Zoom, then we can try to make this a little bit interactive. So I would like to ask some questions, and I invite those in the sanctuary to contribute your answers, and I will repeat those answers if I can hear them for the sake of all those online. And as I've said, if you're online, please contribute any answers or questions in the chat, and I will try and keep abreast of them, or ask Zoe, who's our camera operator tonight, if I've missed any. Now I'm going to take each of the 5 books of the Torah in turn, and I'd like to ask, what in each of those books would you say are the outstanding and foundational laws or values or teachings that can be found in each of those books? So you may need to stand back a bit from the narratives and details of law a little to ask which verses speak most clearly and most compellingly to us, which values provide the foundation of Judaism and Jewish life. So before I contribute any answers, I wonder if anybody would like to begin only with Genesis, Bereshit, to begin with. Would anybody like to suggest a verse or a teaching that is found in Genesis that you might say is the foundation stone of Judaism? Okay, thank you very much. And God saw that it was good, and not just good, but very good, from David Regal. Nothing coming up on my chat here yet, but maybe everybody's a little bit shy. So yes, lovely, David, thank you. Any other suggestions, just in Genesis for the moment? Anybody on YouTube want to venture something? Or Zoom? There's a sort of monumental silence coming out. Okay, well, let's have a look at my answers. These are just Genesis, David's answer. So God created the human beings. We haven't got, yes, God then surveyed all that God had made, and behold, it was very good. And before that, God created the human beings in the divine image, creating them in the image of God. And that's repeated in Genesis 5, verse 1. Another one that we might pull out from here is the mention of Shabbat, of the 7th day. God made it holy and ceased from all the work that God had chosen to do. A 4th one is the sign of the covenant, the rainbow, that God makes with Noah and with all living creatures. Here is the sign I'm giving you of the covenant between me and you and every living being with you down to the last generation. And the covenant, number 5, that God makes with Avram as an individual. So those are the things that I've pulled out, that we're created in the divine image, that creation is a good thing, is a very good thing, Shabbat, and the universal covenant with all living creatures, not just with human beings, but all animals and other living creatures, and the specific covenant that God makes with Avram and his family down the generations. So moving on to the second book of the Torah, Shemot, Exodus. Do we have any, I wonder if my chat is working here. Anything coming up for you on Zoom? No? Would anybody like to suggest what stands out in the second book of Exodus? What do we find there? Please don't be shy. Okay, we've got a few answers coming up on the, okay. Exodus. Okay, I'll give it away then. Whoops, I think, here we go. So the 10 Commandments are Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 words. Then in Exodus 22, you shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me. And again in 23, and also in Exodus 31, we just sung, V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, the Israelite people shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations. And Stephen has said on God heard their cry. So I guess that's another one that we could add there. I seem to have lost my zooms. So, what about Leviticus? Anybody for Leviticus? No? Any takers? Okay, let's look at Leviticus. There's a lot there. The Holiness Code, Leviticus 19, which include laws that echo the 10 Commandments, including the prohibition against idolatry, honoring your parents, keeping the Sabbath again, and of course, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And again, you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. That seems to be a refrain that comes up. And fair and honest business laws. And I've added in there the sabbatical year for the land, consideration for the land, protecting Israelites from permanence, poverty, and servitude. I think that Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, is probably the hardest to extract something from. It's a rather sprawling and chaotic book, it covers conflicts and decisions over leadership that took place in the desert. But I think one thing that we might pull out of Numbers is the cities of refuge in Numbers 35. These cities of refuge are to provide sanctuary for individuals who've caused accidental homicide. And the Torah predicts different situations with varying degrees of conflict in order to protect the rights of both the victim's family and the one who is responsible for an accidental homicide. And Deuteronomy gives an example of that, of a man who goes out into a wood with another man to cut down wood, and as his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, the axe head flies off the handle and strikes the other so that he dies. So the man who is guilty of accidental homicide is able to flee to a city of refuge in order not to be pursued by a family who might want to take revenge. And finally, Devarim, the priestly blessing. Very good, Stephen, thank you. Also from Numbers 6, so that's a great answer. This is perhaps the fullest, really. It's got some real quotable statements and verses here. Once again, you've got the 10 Commandments, you've got the Shema, Hear, O Israel. You've got the famous passage we read last week, What does the Eternal One, your God, demand of you, with the responses to that? You've got once again, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And again, you shall not subvert the rights of the stranger or the fatherless. You shall not take a widow's garment in pawn. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. And choose life. If there are any others that you want to add from Deuteronomy, please do. Again, in the chat. I think people are being a bit shy here. But this leaves us, I think, with one particular passage in the book of Deuteronomy. Of course, there are many. But I think it's of equal significance. And it can be found in this week's parasha, Parashat Re'eh. It comes in chapter 15 of Deuteronomy, which deals with the remission of debts, the purpose of which is to eliminate poverty and the requirement of loans or any other forms of existence. And the teaching in this verse is about the reality of poverty and the need to be open-hearted and generous when meeting the needs of others. So this is from this week's Torah portion. If there is a needy person among you, one of your kin in any of your settlements in the land that the Eternal One your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kin. Rather, you must open your hand and lend whatever is sufficient to meet the need. Give readily and have no regrets when you do so, for there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kin in your land. Now, rabbis are often criticized for being too political in their sermons and writings when they touch on issues such as poverty and human rights. Stick to religion, people have said to me, after a sermon on asylum or austerity. And Dodo has just written in the YouTube chat the chapter in chapter 30 of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, on teshuvah, on repentance, which might be a safe subject to stick on, but not addressing issues of freedom and justice and failing to be an advocate for those who are persecuted or have nothing would be to desert the prophetic ideals and moral teachings that lie at the heart of our Jewish texts and teachings. And I want to just end with a story about the son of a rabbi who asked his father, "Why do you study each child in the yeshiva where you teach as they come in every morning?" The father invited his son to come and stand with him and to just observe. The following day, the son stood with his father and soon thought he understood the reason for his father's behavior. "It's quite interesting watching them go in," he said. "You can see how eager they are to study the Torah. Some have a great zest for learning. Others do not seem particularly anxious to enter." His father responded, "I look at different things altogether. That child's trousers are torn. This one's shoes are quite tattered and worn. That boy over there is definitely hungry. And I ask myself, how will he ever be able to study?" The son saw how his father would take money from his pocket and give it to children so that they could ride home on the bus in winter and not have to trudge through the wet, muddy, unpaved streets. If we can, we all have a duty to give to those who have a right to receive. And nowhere is this more clearly enshrined than in our verse from Deuteronomy 15, in this week's parasha, and throughout the Torah. Thank you for contributing, those of you in the sanctuary and those of you online. We continue our service now on page 519, and I invite you to stand for our concluding prayers. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen.